Chapter 13 The Weasel. It was several days after the ice storm before Professor Albert took Kona to Gooseberry Park again. First, they had to wait for warmer air to blow in and the ice to melt. Then they had to wait for the park crews to remove the devastation of fallen trees. The sound of chainsaws filled the air, leaving everyone in Professor Albert's house with a heavy heart, particularly Kona. He thought of Stumpy's cozy nest destroyed, all her treasures scattered and gone, and he wondered if he really would ever see her again. Finally, Professor Albert resumed his walks to the park, and Kona was mightily relieved, for he had hopes of hearing news there of Stumpy. With the warmer weather, many animals would be out. Someone was bound to know something. When he arrived at Gooseberry Park, Kona could not help his hopes sinking a little. Nearly every tree had suffered some injury, and many had not survived at all. Large piles of sawed trunks and branches laid everywhere. The remains of Stumpy's beautiful pin oak were among them. Still, Kona could sense in the air a spirit of renewal around him. The animals were stirring. There was life. There was hope. While Professor Albert read a book on clams, Kona took off to look for clues of Stumpy's whereabouts. He stopped to chat with the chipmunk, who had just awakened from hibernation and was still a little groggy. "Are you acquainted with a squirrel named Stumpy?" Kona asked. The chipmunk yawned. "Oh, whose cabbage was it?" he said. Kona sighed and moved on. Then Kona met a mallard duck who said that no, he did know what had become of Stumpy, but that the weasels on the west side were bound to know something. All weasels lived for gossip and sensational events, and if one weasel knew something, all weasels knew it. Kona thanked the mallard and headed across the park. Once he arrived on the west side, it didn't take Kona long to find a weasel. He simply stood on a tree stump and said as loudly as he could, "What a strange story!" And sure enough, from behind a broken maple, a weasel popped out his head. The weasel ran over to Kona, sniffing the air. "What's strange?" the weasel asked. What? "It's about the squirrel who lost her babies over on the east side." "Yeah, I heard about that squirrel," answered the weasel. "So what?" "Well," Kona replied confidently, "I hear that a dog on Miller Street—" "Do you know Miller Street?" "Yeah, I know it. Go on," said the weasel. "Well," Kona continued, "a dog on Miller Street had some treasure that belongs to that squirrel, but he can't find her anywhere, and he actually wants to give the treasure back. Now isn't that strange?" "The dog lives on Miller Street, you say?" asked the weasel. "Right," said Kona, thinking as fast as he could. "And I hear he's planning to put a sign on his house tomorrow night, so the squirrel can find him." "What kind of sign?" asked the weasel. "Like a welcome squirrel or something?" "No, I hear that it's going to be a sign only the squirrel will know." "A secret sign," Kona answered. "Imagine, leading straight to treasure." "You sure it's Miller Street?" the weasel, who was always interested in treasure, asked. "Oh, yes," said Kona. "Tomorrow night, a sign for the squirrel on Miller Street, I'm positive." "So, do you know what the sign is?" asked the weasel, his sharp little nose twitching. "No," said Kona, "afraid not." "Then what good are you?" the weasel sneered, and he ran off to find another weasel who might know about a sign for a squirrel on Miller Street. With a sigh of relief, Kona watched the weasel run away. Then the dog turned and hurried back to Professor Albert and home, for he had a very important task ahead of him now. Before tomorrow night, he had to think of a sign.